Hi, everybody. Tina Brock, producing artistic director here at the Idiopathic Radiculopathy Consortium in Philadelphia. I'm your host for Into the Absurd, a virtually existential dinner conversation. I do hope you'll join us the next 50 minutes. Sit back and relax as we explore the lives, the hearts, the minds, and the spirits of creators in Philadelphia region and around the world. Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, I'm Tina Brock here for Into the Absurd, along with Erica Holscher and Bob Schmidt, who are flying this plane today. Welcome to a conversation with Zave Smith, photographer. I'm going to jump into all the ways and means of what that means as a profession and the way his singularly interesting eye is able to zone in on his subjects and bring exuberance and passion out of his subjects. So that's all coming up on today's Into the Absurd. If you're here on Zoom, welcome to you, and we'll take your questions in the Zoom chat room and Facebook as well. Join us, send your questions over, and everything you've ever wanted to know about photography is here. Zave Smith is here to answer. And in fact, let us bring Zave Smith to the table right now. Hey.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome to Into the Absurd, my friend. And I guess we'll start... you're very welcome. We were just before the show talking about how we met, which we'll get into, I guess, a little bit later in more specific visual sense. But it is that you're doing a series on creative souls, creative folks here in Philadelphia. And we'll see that series in just a little bit of time. And that's how we first came to know each other. And I was really fascinated with so many things about what you do. So I guess I want to ask you, is Zave short for Xavier?
No.
Is that your given name, Zave?
No.
Okay, what is your
I was
given name?
raised as Bill Smith. And when I was 17 years old, I ran off and I moved to Israel. And I always hated being Bill Smith because it was such a common name. So if you go from Bill into William into German, which means wolf, and back into Hebrew, you come up with Zave. So I became Zave. And then at one point, I actually changed my last name to Ben Yehuda, because the Judean hills were one of my favorite places in the country. Little did I know when I did that being Zave Ben Yehuda in Israel was actually more common and worse than being Bill Smith in America. So 4 years later, when I returned to the States, I kept the Zave and I kept the Smith, and I've been that way since about 23 years.
Oh, wow. Has anyone ever asked you if it's short for
I get it all the
Xavier?
time, and most of the time I don't answer.
Oh, right. But you're forced to, or maybe not, right?
You get to a certain age, you'll answer anything.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's head back. I'm so curious to know, in your childhood, when the first time you picked up a camera was.
When I look back, I think I was always extremely visually aware. Like, I can remember walking to school as, let's say, middle to late primary school, and third, fourth, and fifth grade, and watching the transition of the compositions of leaves and trees against houses or clouds or things like that. I was always very aware compositionally. And then I think when I went to some sort of summer camp one year, my parents gave me an Instamatic, and I came home with lots and lots of pictures, like close-ups of the bow and arrow and stuff. And they went, we paid money for this, But I think I started taking it seriously probably junior year of high school.
Really? That long ago?
Yes. My dad built me a darkroom at one point. I'm guessing when I was like 15, 16. And at that point, I started really taking photography seriously.
And I know so little about the process of it. What was that at a place where you were?
Well, back in the day, photography was a chemical reaction. You basically expose some sort of light-sensitive iodine with the most common was silver halide, but there were others that were also light-sensitive. And you, sometime about 30 years after the invention of photography, I don't remember who did it. I'm terrible with names, but someone invented what we currently use for many, many years was a negative-positive process, where a photographer exposes a sheet of film, comes out a negative, you take that sheet of film, you put it in some sort of projector, put it onto a piece of paper that's also light-sensitive, and it turns out to be a positive. And that's the basics of chemical photography from around the turn of the 20th century, around 1900, back it up to about 1860 until the advent of digital photography, about 2000, year 2000. It was invented beforehand, when it became a viable commercial method of working digital.
Do you miss anything about that process?
No, but there are some differences. The magic is different. In the analog world, in the wet darkroom, when no matter how long you did it, when you had a piece of paper you were in a dark room with maybe a little yellow light or a red light, and there was in the tray was a liquid, and you put your piece of paper in there and you sit and rock it for like a minute to 2 minutes to 3 minutes, and an image would just slowly and suddenly appear, just like come off the paper and appear. It was magical. And there's nothing that the digital world gives you so many technical advantages, but doesn't have any magic. The result can be magical, but the process is not.
So, okay. So did you then end up studying it in school as a...
Yeah, I didn't start school because when I ran off to Israel, I ended up joining the Israeli army and spent 3 years in the Israeli army. So I was 4 years in Israel, came back, decided to study school. So after some research, I ended up at the Milwaukee Institute of Photography back in about 1978. I think is when I started that. I spent 4 years, got a bachelor's in fine art and photography and printmaking.
And you spent a long time, or a fair amount of time, right near Detroit, outside Detroit?
Well, I left Detroit when I graduated high school in 1973. So I got my training in Milwaukee and started my career there. And then the economy in Milwaukee in around 1987 went south. And I looked for a job elsewhere and got picked up by a department store in Hartford, Connecticut. So we moved then me, my wife, and my daughter, who was 3 at the time. We moved to Hartford and worked for G. Fox & Company in their catalog studio for 2 years, got picked up by the Franklin Mint, and they brought me here to Philly. I lasted, I think, 3 to 4 months there, and I got canned. And that's when I went off and started my own studio, my own business.
Why'd you get canned?
I think the guy who ran the studio was anti-Semitic, and I took off for the high holidays.
Wow.
I think. Never prove it. He was known, I hate to speak ill of the dead, he was known as an asshole.
So you went off on your own, and you have a lot of corporate and since then you've been Zave, and we'll put your links up there, Zave. Yeah.
When people ask me what I shoot, my pithy answer is usually drugs and money, because in the Philadelphia region, who are our businesses, are big employers. There are companies like Vanguard and Merck, Bristol Myers Squibb. So I've done a lot of work in the pharmaceutical space and the financial space, but I also do a lot of executive portraitures. And I'm usually doing some sort of project on my own. I mean, photography is pretty deep in my blood. So for the first 10 years, I basically shot food and product in the studio. And then I felt like the studio world was getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and I hated being there all the time. So I kind of transitioned around the year 2000 to shooting portraits and lifestyle, and I've been doing that ever since. I love it a lot more.
What do you love about it?
The stories. I love meeting people. I love hearing their stories.
So that's a question I have for you. In the shooting of portraiture, is there something specific that you are looking to find in that person to bring out of that person?
I think I'm just naturally a very curious person. So I like to hear and learn where people came from and what they're doing. So that's part of it. And in that telling, most of the time at one point, people will let their guard down. And that's where it becomes interesting. And that's where, there's sometimes I end up having to really direct someone. And sometimes I'll just shut the fuck up and just listen and just like suddenly get really quiet and watch what they do. And sometimes that, depending on the person, those two systems will work. It depends on the person. Also depends what the end product is. If I'm doing a commercial project, I know what I want those person to do. I'm hiring them because they're going to give me smiles or laughter or tears or anxiety or depression or whatever they might be giving me. That's the director in me from a hired talent projecting or portraying a particular role and character and emotional note. When I'm shooting for myself, it's more, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, so that's a question, and we'll still see this played out beautifully in the series of photos that we'll get to in just a couple of minutes. Do you, in going into the shoot, are you selecting the setting? I know for the Creative Soul series that you shot of Philadelphia artists and around Philadelphia, did you some of the settings are simply the places in which people work, but did you have a sense of the mood of what you were looking for before you went into the shoot, or do you just sort of set the stage and then, as you say, look for what's interesting?
I think it's more of set the stage and look for what's interesting. I mean, most artists are fairly emotional, and they're not going to do anything they're not. They're not going to be something they're not. They're just not capable of that. So the better thing to do is give them space to be themselves, and find out what's interesting there.
Mm-hmm.
And the only directing in those situations might be compositional. You know, you might be looking at someone, and like right now I'm looking, there's a beam right behind your head in your Zoom picture. And if I was photographing you, I'd probably move you over a little bit so the beam wouldn't be hitting you in your head, right? So those kind of compositional ideas. So I really do like the way the pictures are forming some sort of 3D rendering kind of thing of you. So if I was photographing you right now, I might direct you to move over a little this way or that way, but I probably wouldn't direct you on your mood. I'd let you tell me what your mood is.
That's so interesting, because in all of the photos that I saw in that series, the artist's mood so beautifully seems to fit the setting, and also the lighting, which seems to be its own character in a lot of the work.
Think about this for a second, Tina. Artists tend to, in many ways, create their environment. You know, especially if they have a studio, they build it around themselves to some degree. And it's going to be an expression of personality. And being artists and sensitive souls, their space is going to influence who they are. I mean, mm-hmm. My wife always kids me when I read a book where the character's got some really strong personality traits, especially if it's one that she doesn't particularly like. And I take on that personality trait for a while towards the end of the book, and she'll tease me about it. You know, we tend to absorb emotion, and then we tend to internalize it and change it and metamorphose it, and sometimes turn it into a play or a book or a poem or a song, or in my case, it might be a photo somewhere down the line, you know? So when I'm with someone, there's usually some sort of emotion going on. You know, when you meet someone for the first time, or if you know someone well, you react to them, you feel something for them, or they're projecting something onto you, or they're feeling something. That's interesting stuff. So just kind of sit back and let it come out.
I know when we did our shoot together for the series, we spent maybe 15 minutes literally shooting, which I found so extraordinary that there were reasons for having to get in and do that quickly, because although we were outside, but have you found it's more difficult? How is your process differing now during COVID than it would?
We were portraying a character. We weren't doing a portrait of you. We were portraying a character. In fact, in that whole series, every one of the people I was portraying, it was you, it was Hannah, or Donovan, or Tamara. You guys were in character. And my job at that point was to put the character in a place where the character could thrive and have a little space to come out. So I wasn't really after Tina or Tamara or Hannah. I was after the wolf, the old woman, and the singer. Mm-hmm. So it was a little different process.
You didn't have to get to know us.
No.
In the same way you would if you were doing a portrait.
Exactly. I wasn't portraying Tina. I was portraying the old woman.
Have you ever thought about directing, or have you directed film?
No, I've directed some very short interviews, but no, never did film. It's too complicated for me. It's like, it's a really different media. I've actually thought about this a lot. The difference between still photography and videography. And it seems on the surface, it's very similar. It's light, it's action, it's texture, it's composition. Those are the formal elements, and you're playing with them. But they're actually very different mediums. And the way I describe it is filmmaking is a writer's platform. You can have gorgeous looking footage, but if you ain't got a story, you ain't got nothing. You can have really awful looking footage, but if you have a compelling story, you got yourself a film. And still photography is more of a painter's platform. The story is important, but sometimes you don't even need a story. Look at someone like Aaron Susskind's photographs of peeled paint. There's no narrative element there unless you project one like an ink blot. But in it itself, there's no narrative there. What is compelling and makes those photographs compelling is their visualness, their painterness. So they're very different mediums in their source. You got writing as a filmmaker's work, photography is a painter's platform, and for whatever quirks of personality, I'm probably more of a painter than a writer.
And yet in the photos, I feel like I could, in looking at each one of the ones that you did, really write an essay or write a story, write a play, write a movie.
Probably could. You could do that with a lot of good paintings, like Edward Hopper. I've always said that this is a kind of a little crazy little thing, that great art is a three-legged stool. Great art has a narrative element. It will have a visual element that says, look at me, look at me. It does something to your eyes. And it will often have a spiritual element. It will somehow connect you to your sense of humanity or a sense of awe or some emotion. Now, not all art has all three, but most great art does. Not equal in makeup or components, but there have elements of both a narrative, a spiritual, and a visual. And that's what makes a really good piece of visual art, when it has all three. You can have some stuff that's like amazing to look at, like special effects. They're amazing to look at, but without a strong narrative or spiritual reason for them, it's just glam. It just doesn't last very long. But if you have someone, like think about, what's her name? The Wisconsin artist who moved to Arizona, painted the flowers and the mountains and the skulls.
O'Keeffe?
Yeah, Georgia O'Keeffe. I mean, if you look at one of her pieces, it blows your mind visually, just the eyes. Boom! They're fantastic to look at. There's an interesting story there. You look at the hillside or the skull and you go, what happened here? And there's a spiritual component, because when you look at her work, you go, it connects to your humanity in some ways on a spiritual level.
Yeah, so that's really interesting as I'm thinking about, and I want to get to them get to your series after this question, but do you think in looking at your photos, when you're trying to decide which ones you're going to use, is primarily the story coming out of the subject, or is it really the context?
I think it depends on the photograph, but I try to bring the two together. When we photographed The Old Woman, or when I did Hannah as a Wolf, we took the character and we put him into an environment that was believable to support the character. So especially, the whole theory behind The Show Must Go On, which is the back part of Creative Soul, was you can't go and perform this character on stage. So what can we do that is sort of stage-like but still COVID safe? Well, shooting outdoors, standing in a stool on a corner was a good metaphor for the lack of stage and supported the character. If you had tried to portray, let's say, Lincoln out there, it might have been a bigger stretch.
Well, I remember we talked about where could we go, since the primary sort of emphasis in the chairs, which is where she's from, is the bringing on of all these chairs and stools and for imaginary guests that are arriving for a speech that is going to happen, right? And so we had to figure out where's the place, and then I think Mr. Barstool came right.
Yeah, I figured, because we had talked about possibly shooting indoors. I think one of us wasn't really uncomfortable doing that, so we went outdoors. And Mr. Barstool popped in. I've driven past it a zillion times. So
yeah, it's the place everybody passes and wonders, and we got to go in. Why don't we take a look at the series if you want to narrate us through it?
A screen share here. Oh, here it goes. I knew it was going to give us a hiccup. They always do when you finally have to do it for real. Okay, so thank you all for joining this series called Creative Souls. And over the last 2 years, I photographed, I think I'm 15 or 20, about 19 people who I've met who are artists of various sorts. And I tried to accelerate that this year in the age of COVID with this last part, which is I call The Show Must Go On, which I took a hiatus about, but I want to restart. So any of you performers out there, if you like what you see, reach out. So the Creative Souls, the first person I photographed was a painter named Tim McFallon, who's works out of his apartment in South Philly. And when I was first introduced to his work through a mutual friend, I must admit I wasn't that impressed. It kind of left me a little cold until I saw it in real. And then it kind of really blew my mind. And I really admired Tim because he is all in his art. I mean, he has one of these artists who's probably sacrificed income and relationships and all those things because painting and communicating through paint is so important to him. And when I photographed him, we had a fascinating discussion. We talked about racism in America. We talked about painting and the artist's life and all these wonderful things. I really wish we had recorded that conversation because I think it would have been a fascinating thing. In fact, after that, I tried to get a couple people interested in videotaping these shoots. I never quite pulled that off, which maybe one day I will. But anyway, this is Tim in his studio. One of the next people I met was this guy named Kevin Fankus, and he called himself a modern minimalist. And he really didn't want me there. I got to his house, it was cold, he was very grumpy, he wasn't quite sure why he agreed to do this. And I think part of it is innate in his personality. I think he's kind of a very introverted guy, a bit closed off. But we went into his studio and I probably spent about a half hour, 45 minutes with him. We spent about an hour talking ahead of time. And I kept thinking to myself, I'm not sure why I'm here because I'm not connecting to this guy at all. But this photograph really worked. What can I say? It's just got some real appeal.
Yeah, I mean, you captured your characterizing him as perhaps introverted, and yet the color behind him.
I think I captured his intensity.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah,
I feel, and yet the background of it sort of spells like this internal world.
Yeah, well, that's his painting. I mean, his paintings are actually, you can see that little bit of a half circle in the left corner, and that little bar heading off horizontally to the right. That's his painting. It's very minimal.
The whole thing is the painting?
What's that?
The whole thing behind him?
No, just that bar.
Oh, okay.
And just that little round thing. The rest of it's just stuff on the wall left over from other paintings.
How interesting.
He's just a very kind of introverted, minimal kind of guy.
Interesting. Yeah, keep going. Oh.
This is Ricardo Rivera. He's a projection artist who's now developed kind of a global reputation, currently working out of the Bach building in South Philly. He's done light installations. He started off doing clubs and bars and then museums. He did a really huge one at Longwood Garden for two or three summers. It was up until recently. And I've met Ricardo once or twice at the Art Director Club events. And at the time, we were both like pretty drunk and we really got along. And when I showed up at his studio about a year ago to shoot this, he wasn't like having it and didn't know why he agreed to do it and put up with me for about 20 minutes. But in that time period, I saw this projector and I thought, So that's where this shot comes from.
Yeah, it's
Ian Summers probably shouldn't be in this group because he's not a Philly guy. He's a New Yorker. I met him back around year 2000. He was a teacher and mentor to many, many photographers. And he ran a group of photographers that got together once a month over the course of 2 years just to talk about business and art and photography. And he's been a mentor and teacher to many people, but he's also a painter in his own right. And he, until recently, he lived in New York for a long time. And then he lived in Stockton, New Jersey for a while, and over in Regalsville. He was actually in Easton, Pennsylvania for a long time, and just went down to Florida. He has these amazing paintings, mainly almost, they're portrait-like, but a bit caricatures and abstracted. But he's been a good friend, teacher, and mentor for most of my career.
Do you feel like this captures your knowledge?
Yeah, I would say Ian has a strong, serious part of his personality, but he can also laugh at a good joke. He just never heard a good joke from me. So
during that time.
This is Lisa Naples, who is someone who one of my business partners introduced me to. And she's a sculptor and potter, and she does these animals, a lot of like rabbits and such. And I must admit, when I first read about what she did and saw it online, I was pretty like dismissive of it. It seemed very suburban housewife-ish. But after talking to her and looking at the things close up, and she talked about them being her spirit animal. And I understand that deeply. And I spent about 2 hours with her. I really grew fond of her energy, her spirit, and her artwork. So, it's funny. Sometimes you meet someone casually or especially online, and it's so easy to be dismissive. But when you dive just a little deeper, you find there's some really interesting things going on there. And I would say that's true with Lisa.
Do you feel so by getting to know her better, you felt like you got to know her art? Did you feel
yeah, I think you grow
differently about her art?
Yes, I think sometimes you can look at a piece of art and it hits you right away and you get it. Speaks to me. Sometimes it takes learning the story behind it to get into it. And sometimes it takes getting to know the artists behind the story to get into it. And sometimes that can give you a higher level of appreciation. Or sometimes you go, my God, this guy, who was the Mexican muralist, Rivera? That guy was such a pig and such an asshole to women and such a chauvinist that it can take away from your enjoyment of the art. With Lisa, it enhanced. Knowing her, knowing the story enhanced the experience.
I love the story of your stories of the process of doing this, how you're feeling a certain way, or you get into the room and there's a vibration and the person maybe doesn't want you there as much as they thought they did. And yet you somehow have to have a journey together in order to produce what it is you're trying to do. I find that I wish you could film these. I really think that would be so interesting.
I think for portraiture, it's a bit weird. They don't know who I am. Suddenly, they say I said yes to this podcast and I had no idea what I was walking into. So you say yes to someone says, oh, you should have Zave photograph you. And you go, okay, cool. Come over tomorrow at 10 or, next month at 10 o'clock. And you show up and all of a sudden you're there and you got a camera and sometimes you got lights and you go, what did I let myself in for? Who is this guy? Here's this middle-aged white dude and you look at him and go, is he scary? Is he safe? Is he nice? Is he an asshole? They don't know who I am, Yeah. And also I got a camera in front of their nose. It's intimidating. It's uncomfortable. I get it.
Well, and it sees right into your soul. And it's sort of like, so the leap of faith that you really are asking, that we must make as the subject and that you're asking us to make that's such an interesting story about how you really have to bear yourself, but it has to be done fairly rapidly and they have to trust you.
I think one of my talents is I can connect with most people fairly quickly. I just have one of these personalities I think it's because I'm actually curious and want to hear people's stories.
Right.
That I connect with people in a pretty rapid manner. It doesn't matter if they're a guy who sells crap on the street to the CEO of Merck. I can sit down and connect with them, usually, not 100%, but fairly often, fairly quickly.
Well, if you're genuinely curious about it, that kind of trumps everything.
Yeah,
right?
People like to talk about themselves most of the time.
And be understood,
Carol Graham, I love this photo. It's one of my favorites. And she used to be an actress and model that I probably hired to do some ad work in my commercial work back around 2000, 2005 time period. Completely lost contact with her. And about a year and a half ago, I'm walking into her Trader Joe's in media. And this woman comes up to me and goes, "Are you Zave Smith?" And I go, "Yeah." And then she reminded me who she was, and we had a good laugh and talked for a moment about the old times. And she told me she's painting nowadays in her basement. I went, "Okay, I'm coming over." And she's got this really dark and dingy basement, and she's got a little corner of it, beyond some broken bicycles and an old, pump or something and some rusted tools. And then this little cubbyhole corner of her basement, she's doing these fantastic paintings, they're sensual and they're full of life and it's full of Carol. And it's like, you just need your soul.
Mm-hmm. This is so, I would say that my knowledge of Carol, that so represents.
Do you know her?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. I mean,
I didn't know that.
I wasn't sure. I hadn't been on a photography shoot for you at some point back in around, but it was around that same time that you were.
Kidding.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. As an actress, we used to go on many of the same calls. Yeah.
You probably did.
That photo just is so.
Yeah, she's really she's very warm.
Yes.
And she's very outgoing, Yeah. I enjoyed reconnecting with her. This is my buddy, Steve Prezant, who's probably been my closest friend and confidant outside of my wife, for the last 20 years. Steve and I, we met at a Art Directors Club portfolio review in New York City, somewhere around the late 90s, 98, 99, 2000, yeah, somewhere in there. I think it was pre 9/11. And those things were just awful. They'd have about 80 photographers and be on these long tables, and art buyers would walk in around, and most of the time they would ignore you. And it was kind of like being on a cattle call. And I'm sure all you performers can relate to this. It can be kind of like demeaning if you don't have the right attitude. So anyway, about a week after that, I get this call and I answer. I was at the studio. And it's a guy, "Hey, Zave, this is Steve Prezant." And I go, "Okay, who are you?" No clue. "Oh, we met at the Art Directors Club last week. I was the photographer sitting across from me at the table." "Oh, okay." No memory of him. He goes, "Yeah, we were chatting. I was just calling to see how you're doing." And I'm going, no photographer, no other man in my whole life has called me up out of the blue like this just to chat. But he happened to hit me at a time I just finished a big thing, and I was kind of chilling out for a little bit before I went home. So we started talking on the phone. And we've been talking on the phone about an hour a day, 5 to 6 days a week ever since.
Oh, wow.
He's now extremely, he's doing some amazing work. He's working on a series called The Americans, which is fantastic. And he's been doing some really interesting work about the state of Pennsylvania. But, he's a New Yorker in his blood, deep. He grew up in Brooklyn. He's lived in Manhattan his whole adult life. And him and his wife, since COVID hit, have been held up in Riegelsville, where they have a weekend house. And Riegelsville agrees a lot with Ellen, his wife. Steve needs the city. He's a city boy. Yeah. He's a bit bored. But he's a fantastic, fantastic photographer. So if you get a chance to look up Steve Prezant, Prezant, check him out. His work's wonderful.
I love this photo.
This is a little bit weird because it doesn't quite fit into the series visually, but this is a guy named Ethan. I can't remember his real last name, but he goes by Ethan Drums, Ethan F. Drums. And he's a drummer, and he didn't like the way that his drums sounded, so he started building his own. And we shot this at a make-work place down in Kensington, or Fishtown. And he's just one of these guys that has, he's a happy dude who builds drums, taught himself how to build drums, and make some really wonderful noise.
That so comes across.
Yeah, this is Dave Moser, who's a portrait photographer here in Philly, probably one of my biggest competitors in the commercial space. Really nice guy. I wish I didn't have to hate him as much as I have to, but I don't hate him. He's a very gentle, and he's a very good photographer, really good portraitist, and a very gentle soul and a good man. And I hope I capture some of that here for him.
Oh, definitely. How do you feel his work differs from yours?
He's a bit more of a formalist. He tends to a bit more like Aaron Susskind. I think it's Aaron Susskind. He tends to be a little grander than I am. I tend to be probably a little more ironic.
So what would that look like?
I don't know. I think my stuff is a little more intimate than his. His work is formally really interesting to look at. He uses very good graphics and very clean lines, very good with light. And it's structurally like, it looks like it should look. You know, it's really, really nice. I don't mean as an insult, but it's very structured. I think my photography is a little down and grittier and probably a little more intimate. I think you get into the souls of my people maybe just a bit more.
To what degree, like let's use the photograph that you have, or the example that you have up right now. And I'm often struck by how much mood there is in the photo. And I think, well, when you were shooting, this particular photograph, were you going for that much darkness, contrast in the back?
I think with, I suddenly can't remember her name. It's Yasemin. With Yasemin, I had met her at a senior show for graphic artists, like a graduating class senior show at Temple University. And I was struck by her work and asked her if I could photograph her, because I really felt like I needed to get some women, I needed to get some African Americans into the series, to be honest. And we met, and it was hard for her to connect with me. I mean, I'm old enough to be her grandpa, and, I'm a middle-class white guy, and she is a right out of school struggling African-American woman. There's a big cultural gap there that we needed to bridge to some degree. I'm not sure if we did, but this was the space. We shot several different spaces there. And I found she had a sense of audacity and power that I really reacted to. And I think that's why I kind of put up on a pedestal like this. But she was still, she's a raw talent. She's a very young graphic designer. She was just a few months out of college. And so I think the rawness here and her sense of potentially being a powerful woman is here. I think that's what I captured.
Oh, I think very much so. I get that in just a very strong way. But the body language her body language is so beautiful. And all of those things you just spoke about, to me,
I think you have to be careful here, because I just said all those things, most of it based on how I looked at the photo. During the time I was shooting it, I was probably only dimly aware of some of that. Because during the time I'm shooting, I go, wait, where's a spot with enough light? Where's a spot with a good composition? How can I get her to do this? Should I get her to do this? Is my camera set properly? Am I focused properly? I mean, you have a bunch of narratives running through your head when you're photographing. And what you have to learn, what I've had to learn, is to relax the technical, let it go. It will most of the time work, because I know what I'm doing. And really permit yourself to feel what you're feeling. Because sometimes you say, I should not be reacting to this person the way I am. That's over the line, that's over the step. I probably shouldn't go there. I shouldn't ask him this. You're self-censoring a lot in the name of politics and the name of personality and just the name of human decency, and you're trying to connect to the person. So I think a lot of what you're feeling probably comes out subconsciously, and you only see it later.
Mm-hmm. But that subconscious piece is what's really interesting to me, because I feel like that had to be a very strong layer in the magic of what you're creating, even though that may not be the thought that's going through your head. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
somehow Yeah.
This guy's named John Howell. He's a tattoo artist, owns a place called Frequency Tattoo in East Falls, and just a real happy guy. He wasn't real thrilled I was there, to be honest. I kind of shoved myself into this photo shoot, but I just love his expression. And I love the light there in his shop, and I think it just kind of captured him, even though I didn't really spend much time with him.
When you say, like, I don't really get the feeling that they were super happy I was there, do you think it mostly has to do with there not being enough time to kind of fully explore what would need to happen in order to feel more comfortable, like, you know?
I think so. And again, I think having a photographer show up at your door, if you're not someone who's used to it, if you're not a celebrity,
yeah, sure,
it's intimidating.
Sure. But I feel like each one of the photos that or the subjects that we've looked, that we've studied so far is unique and quite clear. I mean, at least it's coming through in the photograph to me, their personality that you extracted.
Mm-hmm. Which means sometimes they like it and sometimes they don't.
There's both of those things, but
I always joke with people who complain about they don't love their spouse all the time. And I go, why do you think you should love your spouse all the time? Do you even like yourself all the time?
Good point. Good point.
Her name was Ying Ling. Again, I met her as a student in that senior show. And I photographed her and her girlfriend quite a bit that day. And they were just a lot of fun to photograph. They're both graphic designers. Her girlfriend was actually more of a coder, and Ying Ling was more of a graphic designer. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, her girlfriend really wanted me to shoot this image of her tattoo. So we set up a second shoot in a studio where I can control the light better and shot this. And I actually kind of forgot about this photograph for a while, and I just came across it. And I just love the interplay of the purple light on her face and her shoulder and hand against the green light. That interplay with the blue background, to me, makes the shot. Just it's very graceful, and it's very subtle.
And also the design, the tattoo, in relation to the curves of her face and her arm are
they work well.
And the negative space in there are really beautiful, like the flow of that.
Yeah, it just nicely flows.
Yeah, beautiful.
Erica Basin, she does braiding, and I can't remember how I got in contact with her, but she was a really interesting personality. Well, I know I photographed her once in New York City when she was part of a circus troupe, and then she relocated to Philly, and she was doing these amazing braids, so I included her in this series. I just love those what do you call them? Yellow? No, they're pink. Those pink sunglasses and that.
Oh yeah.
That tool is actually, she uses it in braiding. I'm not sure exactly how. And I think I captured her personality pretty well here. I liked her a lot. We got along pretty well. It was interesting because she's deaf and she didn't always hear what I had to say. So that had its own challenge, was just some of the basics of communicating, until I really learned how to articulate in a way that was allowed her to understand me more, because I didn't realize she was deaf at first. So, and she's profoundly deaf. So it took a little while to learn how to negotiate that, navigate that. But then I think we got some great photos.
Yeah, the gaze is very present and in directed.
Yeah, she was very interesting.
Beautiful.
Benjamin Howard is a painter, does a lot of murals in South Philly. Someone hooked me up with him. I love his work. It's got all these little intricate stories. This is in front of one of his paintings. It was a little bit of a hard session because he had a son with him, a little like 2-year-old. And so, he had half his head was on the 2-year-old crawling around the studio floor while we're trying to pull this off.
That's definitely 2-year-old dad head.
Yeah, I think we captured who he is pretty well here.
That's great.
Oh, I got Stephen twice. That's a mistake. I apologize. So this is when I pivoted to the Show Must Go On series, which I want to restart. And here, again, as we talked earlier, I'm not photographing Tina or Hannah or Andrea, Tamara. I'm photographing their characters. So here, it's really a portrait of the old woman. more than anything else. And here we just went to Mr. Burr's school because this is where you could perform that character for that 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I did like the interplay, though, of this very Victorian gown against this corner. I mean, that's what makes the shot.
It was fun.
Plus, you're beautiful. What can I say?
Oh, you're nice.
So, Tamar had just gotten, she was supposed to play Audrey from Little Shop of Horrors at the Meadowbrook Theater in suburban Detroit. She's a singer as well as an actress. And I've actually been to the Meadowbrook Theater because I grew up in suburban Detroit, so I know that place. But obviously because of COVID, the production got shut down before it began. And so we tried to do a Little Shop of Horrors. And of course, this opportunity came about just a week after Giuliani had his thing in front of, what's the name of the place?
The Four Seasons.
The Four Seasons. Now, I thought we could get in the back, by the garage door opening. We couldn't. We were in the front. If I didn't tell you this was the Four Seasons landscaping, there's no way you would know. But I still like the photo because it does capture that kind of North Philly atmosphere of the road and all that. So here she is.
And the ivy and just sort of being representative of the mayhem of Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah, I actually think the opening sequence of that movie, the dance number in the alley with the red, is one of my favorite moments in cinema.
Yeah.
This is Hannah. What's Hannah's last name?
Gaffney?
Yeah, thank you. So Hannah Daphne's a singer, and she used to perform here at the Westchester Theater. And of course, she hadn't been performing, but I made her put on this complete and utterly beautiful gown and shot it on the steps not that long ago. This was probably shot in November or December. So I just love the way it looks here.
I love the lighting, yeah.
Yeah.
And she looks beautiful.
It's something I've done a few times in this series, in my musician series, where I just leave the lights in the shot as part of it. Something you would normally never do as a photographer. But I actually think that it's very additive that it's a photo shoot here. And this is Donovan Lockhart playing a wolf, which is, it's a bunch of teenage girls playing soccer on a soccer team and their interplay. And we shot this at the little park in South Philly off Washington Avenue. And she was utterly delightful, and she really does look like she could be a soccer star here.
Yeah. It was for Philadelphia Theater Company. The Wolves.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And with that, I say, thank you.
That was such a strikingly wide and deep lens into each one of those people, and having the story behind it of, hey, I don't really think this person necessarily wanted me to be there, but I was. I feel like that got captured.
When you and I first met on the street?
Well, I mean, it's strange, right? I mean, here it is, it's COVID and like nobody's knowing if we should go out, although it was pretty cold out that day and we knew we didn't have a lot of time and we had to figure out the bar. I mean, I'm used to kind of doing those things and sort of getting in and getting it done and moving it along. But I will say that having this conversation with you has reminded me that you can only push it. You can only push knowing somebody so far, right? So like you're in a rehearsal room and you're doing a show and you have months to rehearse, or 6 weeks or a week or 3 weeks or however long it is that you have in that contract. You get to know each other pretty well. And then you're ready most of the time to get up there and do it. It did strike me as we're having this conversation today, how we have to sort of, if we're going on a photo shoot or doing whatever, we kind of have to get in there and do it quickly. But you can't really short circuit the process of opening yourself up to a stranger. I think it's a trust factor, right? Exactly. Well, you know what happened was you said, so sorry, I interrupt. Go ahead. I was going to say, I think somehow Detroit came up and we started talking about the Midwest a little bit. And I spent a lot of time in Indiana. And somehow when I meet someone from the Midwest, I always feel like, whether it's true or not, like that I suddenly get them in a better way than I might have normally. And I think that's
and we have really good wood chippers, you know.
I mean, I have not spent a lot of, and Detroit is really not that near, you know, but somehow I think your point to how good you are at sort of making a person feel at home or comfortable, that, and I was comfortable in the costume.
Yeah, it probably gave you a little bit of defense.
Definitely.
I think also, if I've been doing a portrait of you, I couldn't have done it in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You would not have trusted me, because it takes a little more trust. Mm-hmm. And I probably could have done it in 30 to 40 minutes, but I couldn't have done it in 10 minutes, a portrait of you. You know, unless we were portraying.
That's true. I keep forgetting, right? You were doing you were shooting characters.
If we were shooting a portrait of you, how you want to be seen in the public, like your celebrity face or your performer's face, possibly. But not if I was doing a true portrait of Tina. That would take a little longer.
Is there a point at which in a conversation you feel like, I mean, you mentioned before, it might have been in our conversation we were having before we came on today, how sometimes you'll just, if you just sit back and let most people talk, they will uncover their own gold.
And then, I mean, there's a time, some people are very insecure with their bodies or the physicality. And those kind of people, often you have to direct a bit more, you know, put your arm here, put your head this way, tilt, do this, do that, because they're just frozen in space and in their body. Other people, it's just sometimes you just, you know, you direct and you direct and you direct. And then at one point you just kind of like stop talking, or you stop directing, and you see what, sometimes it's almost like a little bit of a contest of wills. And they don't know it, but that's in my head. And at one point, all of a sudden they go, and you go, ooh, you know, and that's the moment. They let their guard down. They forget about the photographer. They forget about the camera. And sometimes you have to get them a little bit tired. You have to exhaust them a little bit. And all of a sudden they stop fighting. And when they stop fighting, sometimes that's where you can really get it. Other people, though, there's been many people I've worked with over the years and this is something I find very curious, who I don't like and they don't like me. We clash as people, as personalities. And some of them have been some of the most successful and repetitive models.
Oh, interesting.
That tension. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they'll try to push me places I don't really normally go or want to go. But I finally, okay, I'm going to follow you here, you know. And sometimes that can be really, really interesting.
So this is like in your commercial fraternity. These are models or people that you've worked with before?
Well, I would say they're more like models, but not necessarily for commercials. Because when I'm shooting a commercial for a client, let's say I'm doing an ad for Vanguard or Merck, we have a certain emotional and physical note we have to hit. It has to look a certain way to fit in the ad. And they're portraying a certain emotion. It could be triumph, it could be anxiety, it could be God knows what, exhaustion or recovery. So there you're really directing the character to hit you a certain note to make the ad sing. But I'm talking more people who are actors and actresses who were just getting together to fool around.
Mm-hmm. Do you, when you're on Instagram or you are, you know, scanning about, do you think most people represent themselves well in their selfies? I mean, do you think it brings out people's personality, or is it
on a surface?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, this person likes to go to bars. This person likes to go hiking. This person's really into sunsets. But I'm not sure if I'm often seeing much beyond that.
Right.
This person likes to show off. Look, I look so good today. Or I look all this way. You know, you're seeing a very tiny sliver of something they feel like they want to brag about or share at the moment. It's not, unless they're really a good self-portraitist, which, you know, how many of us are, you're not seeing anything more than a sliver narrative that they feel like promoting for whatever reason. It's good sugar candy.
Yeah. Do you, is there a point in when you are working with someone when you, so it's, let me back up. That was not a well-phrased question. So it seems like I love for you to get this videotaped when you go to do this, because it does seem like there's this whole story that's happening for you in the context of the of your subject, right? And it's a story that plays itself out, particularly if you don't know the person ahead of time. And it's a story that you have to figure out together.
It's interesting because, again, it's more interesting if the person's got something to say. Like Tim McFarland was a fascinating person to have a conversation with. Kevin, not so much. He wasn't going to talk. He's not a talker, So some people are just fantastic interview subjects. They're articulate, they're interesting, they're funny, they're emotive, whatever it might be. And some people are not, I remember years ago, I used to be in charge of programming for the Art Directors Club here in Philly, and I would hire these speakers. I would hire them because they just won some award or did some fantastic ad or something amazing in the advertising or design world. And then they would get on stage to give their 40-minute talk, and you never really knew if they were good at talk. Some were amazing and fantastic, and others are going, oh, God. Just... I'm sure you get at interviewing artists like you're doing. Some conversations just are more interesting than others.
Yeah, but I think what's that's very true. But I think what is fascinating to me is that you are so curious. So somehow you are able to bore into, we just saw that through that series, right? You're able to bore deeper into that, or at least that's what I see in there I think you're
right, Tina.
Yeah.
I'm also lately been involved in a venture capital thing, and the other day, one of the other business people said to me, says, "You're really a business savant. Your questions just really bore into the core story of what this business is." And for some reason, I don't know why or how, or I'm very good at putting the narrative, finding the thread, and putting it together and understanding it. I can do it pretty quickly most of the time, not always, but most of the time.
So do you think that that's part of what I'm seeing in those photographs, maybe of the subjects where you were, in your estimation, maybe a little less successful at bridging that bond? You were able to construct the background, the setting, the lighting such that it enhanced.
Yeah, I think when you're on set, you're using all the visual tools you have in your quiver to create. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not there because I want to tell a story. I'm there because I want to create a photograph. So it's got to be visually compelling. So some of the visual compellingness comes from the situation, the lighting, the composition, some of the formal elements you manage to put together on set. Nowadays, a lot of it comes in post, where you can adjust color to enhance the communication. I mean, all those photographs were highly stylized in terms of their color palette, in terms of the lighting. Did a lot of burning and dodging, vignetting, color dodging, color correcting, not correcting, color adjustment. Color is mood, right? That's what we It's a mood. So, I use those tools both during the shoot and in post to create the mood, to make it compelling to look at. Ralph Steiner, I was having lunch when I was a student with a gentleman named Ralph Steiner, long past, brilliant early photographer. And he said to me, remember, a photograph has to have ego. It has to say, look at me, look at me, look at me. And, besides the compelling narrative and maybe some sort of spiritual component, the most important thing a photograph has to have is ego. It's got that power that you're in a room, just like the room you're in, and that photograph over there on the far left just compels me to walk up to it. It's got charisma. It's shouting, look at me.
Wow. Well, Zave Smith, thank you very, very much for sharing your thoughts. We have everybody go check out zavesmith.com. And if you are an artist who would like to put yourself in the hands of Zave, reach out to him. And thank you so much. You're going to continue this series? You're going to pick it up again?
I'm starting again. I just got my second dose of vaccine. So I feel like I can get my life back together to a small degree. I'm going to rejoin the gym March 1st. And I feel safe. The second variant of COVID that started spreading just before the holidays really made me lock down quite a bit. I did a few small commercial projects, but I kept it minimal. But now I feel free to get out there again.
Well, I can't wait to see what creative souls you managed to capture here in the Philadelphia region.
We have a lot of good ones in Philly.
Oh gosh, this is just really a lot of fun
Yeah.
to learn more
Philly's
about
not
what you're
that
doing.
good at tooting our own horn. So I
What's
want to
that?
help us toot our horn a little.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, that's it. I mean, it now that we're here and shut down, as they say, now's a good time to bring the ego to the table, right?
Let people know we're here.
Exactly.
Let our flag unfurl.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank
Tina,
you so much.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
it's really been fun. I can't wait to see what you do.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
everybody.
Thanks
for listening.
Thanks for being with us, everybody, and I hope you'll tune in next week. That would be the 20th, right, when Dr. Rosemary Maleg joins us. Rosemary heads the Theater Arts program at the University of Pennsylvania, and she is the author of a book, An Actress Prepares, Women and the Method. So we're going to look at all the ways in which teaching Stanislavski in America and American theater programs, it's a way of look through the feminist lens with that. And I'm very excited to talk to her more about, as an actress, a director, and as a writer, how she brings all of those things together. So that's Dr. Rosemary Maleg at this time next week at 5 p.m. And in the meantime, we just, from everybody here at the IRC, Erica and Bob and me, wishing you a very happy St. Valentine's Day, and keep that mask on, be safe, and we look forward to seeing you next Saturday at 5. Be well.